Welcome to Midnight Oil, the podcast where we dig deep into history, science, and everything in between. I'm Keegan.
And I'm Tab. Today, we're uncovering some ancient secrets. Literally, we're talking about pyramids, those giant triangular mysteries in the desert.
How did ancient civilizations build such monumental structures without cranes or bulldozers, and why are they shaped like pyramids?
Spoiler alert, it wasn't aliens, probably.
Stick with us as we explore the history, the mystery, and the legacy of these incredible structures.
So, what are pyramids? What
Pick
purpose do
me!
they
Pick
serve?
me!
Yeah, Keeg, what do you think?
They're the pointy things in the desert.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, you're close. Okay. So the basics, right? They're monumental structures, and they were often used as tombs or ceremonial sites, but they're not just in Egypt. They're actually all around, interestingly enough. But they can be found in Sudan or Mayan or Aztecan periods in Mexico. And some of those were used for like rituals or astronomy. So, really, pyramids were used for like all kinds of things. And it's fascinating the fact that there's a bunch of different civilizations that all use the shape, but they were thousands of miles away from each other and years away from building all of those at the same time. So it's crazy because pyramids, they just built a triangle. Because why not? Triangles are cool.
It is true and impressive. We'll get into it, but like the precision in the pyramids is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like we would have trouble doing it today. It's actually insane how precise things had to be to just make it as almost perfect as it is.
Very much that, yeah.
So, jumping into the Great Pyramid of Giza, this wasn't just a pyramid. This is like, you got let's call it a baseball team, right? You usually got that one guy who's like a crazy pitcher or a crazy hitter. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the superstar of the entire ancient world. It was built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong. Put me on blast. But it's not the largest of the three pyramids. Or it's not only the largest of the three pyramids at Giza, but it's also the last standing wonder of the entire ancient world. Because if you imagine this, over 4,500 years old and it's still here, and it towers just over 455 feet. And originally it was taller with a height of 481 feet, and it was polished limestone that made it gleam in the sunlight, and it was visible for actual miles if there was like no sand or dust or anything being like kicked up. And one wild part is that this thing is made of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks.
Whoa.
Each of them weigh anywhere from 2.5 to 15 tons. And this is why we're doing the pyramids, because it was like stacking SUVs on top of each other with no cranes, no trucks, just straight up human ingenuity. And to be honest, that's a lot of work. I don't think I would have been very helpful during this time period because I'm not lifting much of any part of 2.5 tons, let alone 15 tons.
And just to put that in perspective, 2.5 tons is 5,000 pounds.
Yeah, that's like trying to lift a normal car,
That's
or
actually
even
insane.
more than a normal car now, because normal cars kind of fold like tin cans. But literally, it's so much weight. It's like so incredibly insane that there's 2.3 million basically SUVs like just stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
So, experts to this day, there's still debates on how this was pulled off. Like, were there ramps involved? Probably. Levers, alien tech. That's my favorite little idea. Even though I don't necessarily believe it myself, I love the idea that it could be real. But, like, who knows, right? We can't just go back and ask, unfortunately. And I would just love to go back and see it being made and be like, that's actually insane. Because think about it both ways, right? One, humans made it with no modern technology. That's impressive. And then you have aliens, which that's also impressive that aliens were here and decided to take time out of their day and make these pointy ass buildings and then leave. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But basically, the Great Pyramid wasn't just a showpiece. It served as a tomb for the pharaoh. Inside, there was a burial chamber with a bunch of intricate passageways that show just how much effort really went into preparing for the afterlife. Because the Egyptians believed in, like, as most ancient civilizations, they believed in their gods, they believed in the afterlife, they believed in not so they basically wrapped up the people that were buried, and there were no mummified remains really found, and everything about its design points to its role in helping the pharaoh's soul ascend to the heavens. And it kind of acts as, I guess, like an ancient cosmic launch pad, if you want to call it that. So, like, it's insane. The things that they went through were probably absolutely crazy back then, right? So, it's just crazy that these things were stacked in the size and double, triple, or quadruple the weight of modern day SUVs, and they just put them on top of each other. Like, oh yeah, what are you doing today? Lifting about 15 tons. Nothing much. Yeah, Jim and I did that the other day. Pretty neat. Like, what? You just nonchalantly, like, I'm not built like them. I know that. There's some genetic mishap that has happened in the past 4,000 years to where I don't likely look like those men. Like, could you imagine? I'm
They were
not even
fit.
I'm not even 5.5 feet tall. These guys are probably like, I don't know. I guess historically they're shorter, but like they're probably big dudes. They're not. They don't look like noodle arm Keegan. All right, like.
Oh
Mm.
no.
But that kind of goes towards, like I said, the ramps and the levers and pulley systems and stuff like that. There was not a lot of incredibly insane technology back then, but there was some really insane stuff for its time. And they also, as depicted in many historical texts, had thousands of, I will not call them slaves, but that's what they were. And it sucks.
Well,
And
actually, there's recent evidence that showed that they weren't actually slaves. They were paid skilled architects, skilled laborers. There we go.
mm, so they were actually not slaves,
No,
potentially.
they were actually like skilled laborers that were architects and engineers and knew exactly what to do and how to do it, and they got paid. Pretty sure. At least
Oh,
there's recent evidence that shows that that's the case.
well, that's good. Slaves bad. If they had slaves, that's terrible. That sucks. If they didn't have slaves, W Egypt. All right, because all I'm saying is, regardless of if they were slaves or not, these were big people doing a lot of work for potentially a cause that they supported and got paid for.
Yeah.
And it's just, can you imagine? Okay, thought experiment. Everyone, Go try and pick up your car real quick. All right. I'll wait. Are you back? How'd that go for you? Because let me tell you, I don't even have to go out. I have a small car, actually. I'm not lifting it. Maybe with 6 people, but and people not my size, probably more than likely. So there's a lot of things I think about when I think about the pyramids. That's the biggest one. 2.3 million cars stacked on top of each other, but the cars don't have wheels or windows and would not bend under pressure and are solid and made of rocks and limestone.
Hmm. It's really funny because the workers, they actually had like teams and they graffitied the bricks.
It's like working at Walmart.
No, yeah. There's one
Like,
that there's one that's like more well known, and they literally wrote the drunkards of Menkaure, or it's pronounced Menkaure, either way.
what
But
does that
they
mean?
so okay, it was tied to King Menkaure. He was the ruler of Egypt during the fourth dynasty of the Old Kingdom, and he's famous for building the smallest of the three Great Pyramids at Giza. But the whole graffiti, the drunkards of Menkaure, refers to it was a group of people from his time who were said to have indulged excessively in alcohol and reckless behavior. And the legend suggests that their debauchery symbolized either the moral decay of the era or a reflection of Menkaure's own leniency, which may have led to a lack of discipline among his subjects. And I think that's really funny that they graffitied the pyramid.
I mean, could you imagine? Because these things, like, that's almost like at this time, they probably had churches back then, but like, that's like going to graffiti a church because it's supposed to be a sacred place, right? So,
Yeah.
like, could you imagine seeing someone on the street just like graffitiing like a Baptist church or something? Like, I would assume that some people would not see that very fondly, but also graffiti back then, maybe it didn't stain. I don't know. Like, I don't know
I'm
what
sure
they
it
were
was
using.
carved.
Oh, carved
So,
graffiti. Yeah,
yeah.
well. Ooh. Ooh.
That's a little more risque, I guess.
That's actually like going to a church and then like carving like raw into the wall of the Baptist church.
That's like, you know how when those people are pouring sidewalks like out front of a business and the business people go and put like their handprints and sign inside of the concrete?
Yeah.
Kind of like
Yeah.
that, I'd assume.
Gotcha. So it's more of a non-political thing. It's more so a, hey, we're working on this
Let's leave our
thing.
mark.
Leave. Okay, that makes more
Yeah.
sense. I'm glad that they were not graffitiing
The
to.
churches.
Yeah, I'm glad that the churches were not getting graffitied.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. But we're
But
talking about materials now, right?
yeah, yeah. So I kind of got into it with the limestone, but what else did they use? Because I'm gonna assume it wasn't just limestone. I know there was a little bit of gold going around. Knew about the little bit of gold, but I don't know anything else about the materials.
Yeah, so the limestone was for the outer casing of the pyramid itself, so the bricks that you probably look at when you go and visit. But if you go inside, they used granite for the inner chambers. So the limestone was quarried locally, and the granite, which is a lot harder to work with, and that was brought all the way from Aswan, potentially is how you say it. And that was like 500 miles south of Giza.
What?
Yeah.
500? No.
Yeah. And so
500?
yeah, like that was far. But here's where we get into the Nile River. They use the Nile River like a giant highway to transport all of that granite. And they usually waited until the flood season when the river was at its highest, and they would just put massive blocks of granite on wooden boats and just float it down the Nile River.
Bro, 500 miles? So you're telling me that they quite lit they bro, I can't I'm actually losing my mind over this. 500 miles is the length, I'm pretty sure, roughly of the entire United Kingdom.
That's crazy, actually.
So you're telling me they hauled this shit that far?
Yeah. Well, on boats. So thankfully, they weren't doing the heavy lifting. The water was.
That's true. But that's a you still have to load them. You have to because I'm gonna assume that it wasn't like a 5 minute adventure to
Oh,
get
probably not.
500
No.
miles. So you had to feed these people. You had to make sure that the boats didn't get. I don't know why they would be robbed, but I'm sure that there was some sort of like pirating going. There's just so many logistics that goes into tr- traveling 500 miles with raw materials slash humongous bricks of rock. Like, there's so much.
Yeah. No, very much that. But the blocks of granite were sometimes weighing up to 80 tons. And so if we think back, 2.5 was 5,000, 15 tons was 30,000. So 80 tons, heavy as hell. But whenever they got there to offload it and pull it to the site where they were building the pyramids, of course they used like the sledges and ramps, and the workers poured water over the sand to reduce the friction so it'll be easier to pull.
Where are they getting the It's a desert.
I don't
It's a
know.
desert. What do you mean the water?
They probably
There's
had
no water.
wells.
I mean, other than the Nile, I guess. But the Nile is only so wide. Eventually, where's the water coming from?
Can you imagine people are just running like with buckets miles to the Nile? And they just
Hundreds.
had like teams of people running to like go refill buckets and then run back and pour the water.
Could you
And it was just
imagine?
one after another.
That's your job? You're the bucket runner?
Dude,
For
I'd
10,
collapse.
50 years, you run buckets?
I would actually collapse and just die.
Actually, back then, I think the lifespan in Egypt was like 30 something years old.
That checks out. That'd be me. I'd probably die at 25. Let's be real.
30 to 35 if you were a workman.
Okay.
So,
I mean,
if you were a worker, you were living to 30 to 35. Officials died at about 50 to 60.
that sucks.
If you were a male, 22 and a half to 25.
Oh.
So, if you were a
25,
man,
yeah.
after you stopped pissing your diaper, they said, "Here's this bucket. Your purpose is to go to this river, fill the bucket up, and throw it on this hot ass sand, so we can slide our rocks across it." Oh my god, what a difficult life, actually. Like, I don't think I
Yeah.
would survive that if I'm being so real. Like, I did manual labor as like a warehouse worker in my life. There's some people there that have been there for 30 years. I could not imagine doing that for 30 years. I just can't possibly. And that's probably not even a percentage as difficult as this was. Like, could
So,
you imagine you're the one slinging these rocks around?
that'd be
And this
horrible.
water, like, I shout out to anyone that hasn't lived in the past 80 years because all of that shit was complicated and difficult.
Very that. So before we move into kind of like the significance of like why pyramids and dive a little bit deeper into that, I've debunked the whole water situation.
Okay.
So back then, the pyramids and desert surrounding the pyramids wasn't as barren as it is today. The Nile River was actually like the lifeline of ancient Egypt. It had annual flooding, which made the surrounding land fertile, and they had plenty of water to work with. So during the flood season, the Nile River rose and expanded, creating natural canals. The Egyptians built additional canals and basins to bring water closer to the pyramid sites. They used the river to transport massive limestone and granite blocks on wooden boats, like we said, cutting down on the effort needed to move them across land. And, back then, back in the day, back in ancient times, everybody was super into irrigation systems because that's how, you supplied cities with water and stuff like that. And the
Sure.
Egyptians were masters of irrigation. They diverted the water from the Nile into channels and basins, and so that helped with construction, farming, and also drinking water.
Wow. So it's not necessarily that there wasn't water there. It was just a much different time, and they actually had floods in the desert,
Yeah.
or at least near where the Nile
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Wow. I wonder how much different the climate is now compared to 5,000 years ago. I'd love to do an episode on the history of weather or something,
Climate change.
climate change.
That'd be cool. Okay. So after we figured out the water situation, let's dive a little bit deeper into the actual symbolism of the pyramids. So the pyramid shape wasn't just about, being a pyramid, looking cool. It was a big triangle. It actually had, deeper spiritual meaning, which we mentioned previously. So it wasn't, just tombs or for sacrifices or stuff like that. It was supposed to represent the sun's rays, which were thought to connect the pharaoh to Ra, which was the sun god that they worshipped. So circling back to talking about how it was kind of like a launch pad in a sense, it was a divine stairway to heaven. So the pharaoh wasn't just chilling in the afterlife, he was climbing those stairs straight to the top to join the gods. So whenever the pharaoh died, it wasn't a burial, it was actually a transformation. So the pharaoh was no longer a human king anymore, he became a god in death. And the pyramid was supposed to symbolize that journey. And all of the pyramid's triangular sides, they all point up, drawing your eyes towards the sky, reinforcing that connection to the heavens. So it was simple, but it was low key brilliant. Like, let's be real, that was cool. That was really
The
cool.
the fact that like they just thought like this is what we are going to do and then did it with precision is really impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just break it down, and I'm going to speed run through this part because it's a lot of just more logistical information based on like structural stability, the evolution of its design, the impact, the symbolism, which you already kind of went over, but there's a couple other things that I want to talk about. But I'm gonna speed through it because we are getting long already.
Long.
Long. So first off, I'm going to talk about the Egyptians chose the pyramid shape, and it's actually, like you said, absolutely brilliant. It's iconic now, but it wasn't just for show. It has a ton of practical advantages. First, the pyramid shape is super duper stable. Because if you think about it, a wide base that gradually narrows as it rises, it distributes the weight very evenly. And that's why these structures have lasted over these 4,000 years through different earthquakes, sandstorms, all of these natural disasters. They're still there, obviously, because we can see them. And over that time, nature's just kind of thrown all kinds of stuff at them. And unlike other designs that could have crumbled or would have had a bunch of structural issues, they never crumbled under their own weight, which is very impressive because the pyramid's geometry naturally resists collapse. And they engineered these things to be basically eternal.
Smart.
But here's a little thing that it basically wasn't always like that. The pyramids evolved over time, and in the beginning, we had mastabas, which were flat rectangular tombs, basically that stacked like a giant stone bench. And then there was a breakthrough, the step pyramid of Dozer. There's a J in there. They're throwing letters at me that don't belong in these words. It's DJOSER. I'm just going to call it Dozer. Basically, it was built around 2670 BCE, and it was the first pyramid that we know of, designed by the legendary architect Imhotep. I'm butchering that. He essentially stacked several mastabas on top. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong too. On top of each other, creating a tiered structure that was both practical and symbolic. So, to be remembered and to structurally last. Basically, engineering genius at its finest back then. And then the real game changer was the smooth sided pyramids that we all recognize today, as this design reached its peak with the Great Pyramid of Giza, where they perfected the angles, the materials to achieve the sleek, polished look. It wasn't just about the aesthetics. I can't say that word. Aesthetics. Even though it was a reflection of their very advanced engineering at the time and their connection to the divine, because they were a very, very belief heavy society.
Hmm.
And like you were saying, the evolution of the pyramids wasn't just about solving technical challenges, it carried really deep meaning. The Egyptians saw the pyramid shape as a physical representation of sun rays, linking the pharaoh directly to Ra, the sun god, and the heavens above. So it wasn't just a structure, it was basically a statement of power, religion, and eternity. It was literally the quintessential, like, holy cow, this is actually an incredibly epic thing. Not like, oh, this is epic, but like grand, beautiful, like it was just put together well. It's meant to stay, and there's just so many different statements that a pyramid makes just by even looking at it.
Hmm.
So, from the mastabas to the step pyramids to the marvels of Giza, the pyramid wasn't just an architectural choice as much as it was a blend of practicality, innovation, and spiritual belief of its time. And these structures weren't just meant to last, but they were meant to literally transcend. And I think it's really crazy that, like, just how perfect all of these things were orchestrated and created. Holy cow. We're almost there, I promise. I'm so sorry if this part has been boring. I'm just throwing a bunch of information grenades at you, but I'm almost there. And then you can take us on our way. So, the legacy and the mysteries of the pyramids goes incredibly deep. I'm just going to go over some things. So, the Great Pyramid of Giza, it's not just old, it's a record breaker. For 3,800 years, approximately, it held the title of the tallest man made structure in the world. That's longer than anything ever since, including our tallest skyscrapers. Because if you think about it, the next time humanity surpassed it was when the cathedrals, like Cathedral, and later the Eiffel Tower were built tens of thousands of years later. So it's literally not just history, it's a dominance. There is some crazier things like the hidden chambers, because after all this time, the pyramid still holds secrets. Inside, researchers find hidden chambers using advanced tech like ground penetrating radar and muon tomography. Just recently, scientists discovered a huge, massive void above the Grand Gallery, which nobody knows what that's for or what's inside. Maybe it's a symbolic passage, or maybe there's like a bunch of like gold there or something. I have no idea, but it could be even something that our little peanut human brains haven't even thought of yet. So insane. And then you have precision. The Great Pyramids are aligned almost perfectly with true north, which is a feat so exact that even modern builders would struggle without GPS, lasers, the precise measuring tools, stuff like that. And it's also aligned with the stars, particularly in the Orion belt, which the Egyptians believed were tied to the afterlife. So, like, how did they end up pulling that off? Because it's literally a celestial alignment with just using their eyeballs and tools. I would love the answer to that.
Aliens.
Aliens. That's right. I'm telling you, man. I don't believe it, but I want to so bad because some of this stuff just doesn't make any damn sense. The Great Pyramid isn't just a monument, it's literally a mystery. I keep saying literally, but it is. It quite is just a mystery on how it was built because what's still hidden inside is probably mind blowing. The precision of the design is literally breaking some scientists' brains and historians and anyone who looks at it because it's not just a relic, it's literally a little puzzle, a little intricate puzzle that we keep messing with and keeps pulling us back, and we find more and more things about it. And honestly, I think that's what makes it so timeless because even thousands of years later, we're still uncovering secrets and we're probably just scratching the surface. And people want to see it every single day. There's so many tourists. So that's what I mean. I know I just info dumped, but I think it was important. There's a lot of stuff going on with the pyramids, and that doesn't even have anything to do with some of the conspiracies, like, or different theories. Like, there's just so. I remember this is my last thing. I remember doing a project on King Tut in like third or fifth grade or something like that. And even just about King Tut and his rule and the people around him, there is so much. I don't want to call it lore, but there's so much history and lore in Egypt that it's absolutely mind blowing. I guarantee you that you could read 500 books on Egypt and still not know everything. Like, it is quite literally, there it is again, the one of the craziest feats of the ancient world, at least in my opinion, because they're just building this shit with their eyes. Like, they they're measuring it. They're like, you know how, like, in if this may not make any sense to people, but like people way back in the day before the compass used their hands and like measured the stars while they were out in sea. They were like doing that when they were like setting up these pyramids, and they were like, yeah, that looks good. And then like thousands of years later, they're literally aligned perfectly. Like, okay, get real. How'd that happen, buddy? What are you talking about? Like, it blows my mind.
No, that is kind of crazy.
By the way, I'm just jumping right in here after my little yap fest. If you want to hear, we've been recording for 44 minutes already. If you want to hear the unedited version, which will probably now end up being an hour, go to the Patreon. Go to the Patreon
It'll be
because
worth.
it's gonna be it's probably a lot of the stuff that I have said will be cut out potentially because I was yapping, but it was good information and it was funny. So go to the Patreon. Okay, Tab.
Yeah, so let's talk about a little bit of the legacy that they left in terms of who else did pyramids. I know that we briefly touched on it at the beginning of the episode, but of course, the Mayans and Aztecs, their pyramids, like the one at, I'm going to butcher all of these names, the Chichen Itza and the Teotihuacan in Mexico.
I
They all
think you nailed it.
served, yeah, served different purposes, mainly religious ceremonies and sacrifices, but the basic idea was the same: a monumental structure connecting the earth to the heavens. Their pyramids had steps instead of smooth sides, but they were just as impressive. Some, like the El Castillo at Chichen Itza, even doubled as giant calendars. How cool is that? Like, let's be so real. Pyramids
Wait,
representing the calendars? That's sick.
so they basically were able to figure out roughly the time of year or even the direct day that it was based on these things?
Yeah. So, like, for example, during the equinox, the sun creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down the pyramid. Isn't that sick? Like, that's sick
That's
as fuck.
crazy. Could you imagine trying to make something like that today?
That'd be crazy.
Like they did this thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Holy.
And that ties into, like, how cool is that two different civilizations, the Egyptians and the Mesoamerican civilizations, shared the idea of building something bigger than life. And they chose pyramids. That's crazy.
Are Mesoamericans like the Mayans?
Yeah, like the Mayans and Aztecs ish.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But if
I
we
didn't
fast
know.
forward to today, the pyramids are still a big deal, of course. Like it's a huge tourist attraction. They're part of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So they get millions of tourist visits every year to just stand there and look at it. Why? That's crazy. But they've also become cultural icons. So if you think about it, how often do you see pyramids show up in movies, books, and video games? All the way from Indiana Jones to the movie. Like they're ultimate symbols of mystery and adventure. So come on, pyramids are cool. But let's not forget their influence on modern architecture. So you've got like glass pyramids like the Louvre in Paris, or even the
The Louvre?
Luxor. Sure. Yeah, the Louvre. But it's in
Oh
Paris.
no.
There's a glass pyramid in Paris. And even the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas has a pyramid too. They're not tombs, but hey, that design obviously it still commands attention. So the pyramids were doing something. Pyramids are just simply timeless, and they're like, hey, we did something incredible here. Here's a pyramid. So like they've really left a legacy, and it's super impossible to ignore pyramid symbolism. And I remember actually from our Halloween episode, I'm pretty sure we discussed like the significance of like not walking under a ladder. And it's because of the Egyptians thinking that the triangle slash pyramid had like spiritual significance. And so you shouldn't walk under a ladder. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh.
Well, no. Which happens frequently.
So that's fair. But yeah, anyways, that's all I got.
I mean, I yapped a bunch. I apologize if you didn't like the word bombs, but I had become prepared this time and I wanted to prove that I can carry my weight during these conversations a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately pyramids are just very ancient mysteries, and I honestly think that there's a lot more that we could have covered. We may return to it in the future because I just love old cultures. Like I love Greek culture, I love Egyptian culture, I like Roman culture, and I think you and I kind of share the same on that. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll come back if it's received well. But we've got some extras for you. So if you love what we do and say and yap, head over to the Patreon. We release unedited episodes, early bird episodes, our pre-shows. You get a little behind the scenes look on just us more as human beings and how we dive into different topics. And it's always funny, at least. So if you like to laugh and you aren't a grumpy old Grumpington, you should go check out the Patreon. And it's a great way to like support the show. If you can't support the Patreon, just support us by going to our socials, which are linked in the descriptions anywhere where you're listening. And that's about all I got. You like that little voice crack? That was nice.
Yeah, so let us know your favorite pyramid fact or theory. anywhere in the comments, you can find, again, all of our socials. So you can go comment on any of our socials. You can comment on the Patreon. You can comment on our YouTube. You can comment wherever you're listening and let us know about that.
And shout out to Zaid, Cameron, and Dakota for supporting us on Patreon. We highly, highly, highly recommend you at least go check out the free version of our Patreon, bare minimum. And we're starting to do a bunch of fun stuff. We're really cooking. I'm not gonna talk about it yet. We might talk about it on the pre-show, but we are in the kitchen right now, and I think that the direction of the podcast has really made itself clear to us, and we got I'm just going to say a bunch of really cool shit that we want to do. So go check it out if you want a little bit more information. But that's all I got. All right, then we will see all of you in the
On
next episode.
Friday.
Nighties.
Good night.